Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
This amendment would prohibit the use of funds to discriminate on the basis of race and ethnicity in admissions to the military service academies. Currently, all of the military service academies use race and ethnicity as selection criteria for admissions. Not only is this a violation of the Constitution, as recently affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court, it is a violation of the military's long-standing meritocratic principles. The military service academies are elite universities which train and educate the future leaders of our armed services. We need the best and the brightest, the most fit cadets and midshipmen, regardless of their skin color and ethnicity. To consider immutable characteristics like race and ethnicity as blatantly discriminatory. For our national security, we must uphold the ideals of our country and put hard work, dedication, and service above all. I reserve the remainder of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Washington rise?
Mr. Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Chair, Mr. Banks' amendment to prohibit our nation's service academies from promoting diverse experiences and backgrounds as part of its admissions policy will do nothing but weaken our military. The Supreme Court recently recognized in its decision to leave service academies out of its ruling on affirmative action that our academies are not laboratories for ideological gerrymandering. They are institutions that are foundational to our national security. Our service academies are responsible for providing a higher education, but also for training our nation's men and women to serve as global leaders. Many graduates will serve in the highest levels of our military and government, where success depends on maintaining an open mind, building diverse coalitions, and drawing on broad experiences. They will lead as part of a military that has never been more diverse, more capable, or more lethal. Soon, nearly half of our service members will be people of color, but only a fraction serve as officers, and even a smaller fraction as senior leaders. We learned bitter and painful lessons in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, when leaders neither understood nor looked like the formations they led. It's 2023, not 1952. If my colleagues across the aisle knew more about the painful history of this country, perhaps last night one of them would not have referred to black service members as colored people. Let's not move our country backwards. I oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
I'd like
to thank the gentleman from Indiana for introducing this amendment. I think it's a common sense amendment. Right now, there are all sorts of rumors out there that when people are admitted to the service academies, which after all are going to wind up running our military, the one part of our government that cannot fail, that preferences are being given and they're not always taking the best people that they can. I want to point out something that's a little bit offensive about this whole diversity thing. Diversity for people like the Democrat Party, sadly, is solely determined by your genetics or your DNA or where your ancestors were 200 years ago. I'll give you an example to show the foolishness of it, and that the real goal here, I think, is to divide Americans. If I am 1/4 Peruvian, I can identify as Hispanic. I can identify as Hispanic despite the fact I've never spoke a word of Spanish and never been south of the border in my life. But the people who just want to divide America would say that I have a unique perspective growing up in a Milwaukee suburb, despite the fact that I am, 1/4 from a different part of the world. This is preposterous on its face, and it will inevitably lead to division as we are educating our military that they should look at people by where their ancestors came from, not as individuals. This true racism, which is what it absolutely is, because that's how they determine which silo you fit into, has got to be ripped away from our society and the military in particular. The idea that we have different viewpoints because of where our ancestors came from, despite the fact that we have not been there and know nothing of them, is preposterous. And like I said, in addition to the divisiveness, you're going to wind up with people who are not necessarily the best people to lead our military. Anybody familiar with military history knows the important decisions that have to be made during wartime. We want those decisions made by the brightest people we have, not by people who've been picked based upon where their DNA was 2,000 years ago. Thank you.
The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
I yield 1 minute to the ranking member of the Military Personnel Committee, Andy Kim.
Gentleman recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, look, I want to just start off by just responding to what was just said. It is absolutely important that we set straight that diversity does not mean we're talking about people who are less qualified. We're not talking about reducing standards. We're talking about having part of the decision recognize it is one part of many. So this is not a situation where it is the overriding factor. It is one part. We are still trying to, and I agree with what the Chairman Banks said, which is we want the best and brightest. But what we recognize when it comes to our service academies in particular is that this is a situation where we are trying to also build a force. This is not just about an individual. Yes, we want the best and brightest, but we also want the most cohesive and effective fighting force for our country. That we recognize we're building an entity where our service members are part of something bigger than all of them. I think about this brief that was put forward to the Supreme Court that laid out, this was written by former military officials that said the importance of maintaining...
I want to yield another 30 seconds.
Additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. They said, quote, the importance of maintaining a diverse, highly qualified officer corps has been beyond legitimate dispute for decades. History has shown that placing a diverse armed forces under the command of homogeneous leadership is a recipe for internal resentment, discord, and violence. This is written by former military leaders that are advising us to make sure that we let the military be able to control, be able to have the tools that they need to build the force that our country needs. And with that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield a minute and a half to a real American hero, Mr. Mass from Florida.
Gentleman from Florida recognized.
Thank you. I'm amazed at the bigoted comments I'm hearing from the other side right now. Literally stating that units need to look a certain way. There have to be people of certain colors in these units. It's purely idiotic. It's dangerous. War is not a game. It's always dangerous. It's very often deadly. I damn near gave my life for this country. And I can tell you the last thing that I cared about was the color of the snipers that had my back or the color of the medics that were putting tourniquets on each of my legs and my left arm when I was injured on the battlefield. It didn't matter if they were black, white, brown. None of that mattered when they were recruited into the military, and it didn't matter as they were serving. It has absolutely zero place, and you're literally putting the lives of our service members in danger by saying, this is concretely what you are saying, units need to look a certain way by color. And I just posed this quick question. I don't know how much time I have remaining, but I'll bet you all over there can't tell me what my background is. Am I part black, part brown, part white? What am I? I'd yield time to you for a colloquy if you want to answer that. What am I?
To direct their comments to the chair.
Chair, I'll bet they can't tell me. I hear silence because they can't tell me, because you don't know what I am. You don't know that I'm half Mexican. You can't look at me and see that. But you believe that units should be made up of something that you can't see and that you can't ask about. Idiotic policy, dangerous for our service members, and they deserve better from the other side. I yield back.
Just a reminder, the comments are to be directed to the chair. The gentlewoman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to Vice Ranking Member of the House Armed Services Committee, Pat Ryan.
Gentleman.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank my colleague for his service. I rise as a proud graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and a representative of the Academy today. And whether my colleagues want to recognize it or not, particularly those on the far right, we have an increasingly, growingly diverse force. And as Mr. Kim said, unit cohesion, we can all agree, is essential and critical, both in the heat of battle and in training and preparation. This amendment would unequivocally, as you heard from retired military officers across the board, weaken unit cohesion. And even the considerably, to be generous, conservative Supreme Court has recognized the distinct interests of these service academies in the recent decision that came down just a few weeks ago. We have made great strides at the academies with a focus and bipartisan commitment for decades. West Point has gone from 20% to 36% cadets of minority backgrounds, Naval Academy 19% to 37%, but we still have work to do to achieve unit cohesion. I'm out of time and yield back.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time to myself to close.
Recognized.
This amendment is simple. It ensures our military service academies are in line with the Supreme Court's recent decision on the unconstitutionality of race-based affirmative action, and it strives to uphold the ideals of meritocracy, which is nowhere more important than in the United States military. I urge all members to support it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have remaining?
1 minute.
All right, Mr. Chair, I yield myself the remainder of time. Today's military leaders are unequivocal in their support of diversity in leadership. Joint Chiefs Chairman Maley considers it fundamental. Army Chief McConville calls it crucial competitive advantage. Then Air Force Chief C.Q. Brown called diversity an imperative. And Marine Corps Commandant Berger said, the core of America's strength lies in its diversity. And the very government assembled here today, in its amicus brief to the Supreme Court, characterized a diverse pool of Academy graduates as a vital interest in which the nation's future depends. The American people expect and demand that our academies are given every tool and advantage to train leaders capable of fighting and winning our nation's wars. And make no mistake, diversity is not synonymous with less qualified. We want the best. We want the brightest. We need the most diverse. This amendment attempts to weaken a concept foundational to our current and future military supremacy, that diversity translates into capability and lethality. Thank you, sir, and I yield back.
Thank you. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Excuse me. For what purpose is the gentlelady from Washington being recognized?
Now that I'm recognized, I ask for a recorded vote.